Greetings and welcome, my friends. I'm News Talk Radio's John Gormley, and thanks for checking in wherever we have found you on this day. On now, Scotty, I can do this. On now, Premier Brad Wall. I'm just typing that literally as I'm saying it. We call it Ask the Premier. Every month or so, Premier Brad Wall joins us, and it is 1 full hour of radio. It's an accountability session where you have a chance to put your questions to the Premier. Sometimes it is a political issue going on in the legislature, and the Ledge just resumed this week. Sometimes it is a larger issue affecting Saskatchewan's place in Canada. Sometimes it's a specific concern you have. Only rule on Ask the Premier, as it is with many other segments on John Gormley Live. If you have a question, don't wait for me to ask it. I have a habit of not asking what you want. Make sure you get your question in now at 1-877-332-8255. Premier Brad Wall joining us now on the line. Mr. Premier, thanks for taking our call.
Thanks, John.
Okay, let's kind of begin with most recent and work backwards. You were in the UK for meetings, then you were over in Ireland for a little bit of this recruitment event. What was the sense when you were in Ireland on Saskatchewan recruitment?
Right, 2 parts to the trip. Actually, 3 parts. The first part we talked last week when we were working on some investment attraction with some of the mining companies and others in London, and I'll go to the third part quickly. That was we were in Ottawa, had a chance to meet with the Prime Minister and some federal ministers and some issues on the way back. But in the middle of that, very importantly, was the Irish Job Fair, which held in two cities, in Dublin and then in Cork, more in the south of Ireland. And I could tell you, as I've said to some of the other media upon return, really mixed feelings, John, because the lineup, they said, was close to a kilometer long. I know that 2,000 people were refused completely to even line up because they knew they wouldn't get through the job fair, where Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, mostly Saskatchewan, were offering employment opportunities. And that happened both days. And I understand, again, significant lineups and lots of traffic in Cork, where Minister Rob Norris stayed, who's the Employment and Immigration Minister, stayed when we came home. So mixed feelings, because that was the scene out there. And I went up and down the line both days just to talk to people and let them know that they were going to get in if we knew that was the case, if the time was there. And then the happier part of it was to be inside where our employers are, literally making dreams come true for very highly skilled people who've been out of work sometimes for a year and a half. And some were offering jobs on the spot. We had interview rooms set up for employers to take their candidates to talk to. We had our nominee program immigration people there right at the fair, and then later at the hotel, so people could begin processing right away. We had people who recently moved from Ireland to Saskatchewan to tell them, they have a lot more credibility than politicians, and people there wanted to talk about everything from the price of milk to health care to daycare. And here you had a young couple able to answer the question, Howard and Sinead. So a remarkable experience. It's part of our plan for the labor shortages. John, we also have to continue to invest more in training here. We have to recruit other Canadians, and we are doing all of that. But we see good job numbers out again this morning, 6,000 plus created. We see jobs available on saskjobs.ca. We need it all. We need foreign recruitment from overseas, and we need to fully engage people in Canada and in Saskatchewan as well.
When you were away, one of the northern MLAs, Mr. Vermette with the NDP, made the point that you should be recruiting and training northern Aboriginal people, and then he said, instead of going out of the province or out of the country. How do you respond to that?
Very interesting. This is not an either-or proposition. While we were in Ireland, for a time, the number of jobs available at saskjobs.ca to be filled was over 13,000. We know what's coming in terms of expansion and investment in mining across the province, in potash and uranium. We see strength in oil. We see the service sector showing strength. And so we need to recruit in every area. We have invested in training. In fact, the amount of investment in First Nations and Métis education training is up 20% from last year, up $46 million. Increased training by 25% to the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technology, a higher amount to Gabriel Dumont, and the training that we're doing with First Nations and Métis and Northern residents is working. Today's number of the 6,100 new jobs created in Saskatchewan year over year, which is we have the lowest unemployment rate in the country, tied with Alberta. 5,900 of them today Aboriginal. 5,900. So these things are working, and yet there's still a labor shortage. And I think it's very short-sighted to say it's either or. That's not how the province was built in the first place, and it's not how the new Saskatchewan's getting built. We need it all, and Ireland offers English-speaking, highly skilled workforce that's very underutilized, unfortunately, for them right now, and an opportunity I don't think we can miss.
Premier Brad Wall, this is what we call Ask the Premier. Lines are already lighting up, and this is a good sign. When we hear our first commercials, then we're going to come back with your calls for the rest of the hour at 1-877-332-8255. You're getting heat on the proposal as the legislature returned this week to create 3 new seats to go a legislature now 58 up to 61. This is one of these times you and I are on the different page. I put it clearly. I just think we don't need new MLAs as much as we could hold the number of seats, then expand the size of the ridings within them. Maybe it would cost you money because you'd obviously have to pay for more support staff. But are you sending the right message by creating new politicians?
Well, you cost money and you dilute, I think, representation for certain parts of the province is a concern. And so I think we've tried to strike a balance. The highest number of MLAs we've ever had in the province is 66. And even though we're at the highest population numbers ever in the history of the province, we certainly didn't go that high. We think there needs to be a balance between what you're talking about and representation. So we're going to end up at 61. And, you know, John, I think the extra cost is $700,000 or so dollars to the Legislative Assembly budget. We're going to find that. This is not going to, I'm completely confident, this is not going to cost additional money. In fact, as a government, we've saved money in the political function in 4 years in terms of political staff and communication. So I understand the premise. We want smaller government, and we're making progress in that regard. We're reducing the size of government by 16% over 4 years. We're in the middle of that process. It's working well. And that's why we've kept the balance here. We didn't go to that very high number from the past. Even though our population's grown at record levels, we're going to balance it at 61, and again, we're going to achieve it without additional cost to taxpayers. I'm completely convinced of that through the Legislative Assembly budget. So I think we struck the right balance. Is there
a public policy debate, though, that, again, I often go back to 1911, when America's House of Representatives kept growing and growing and growing. Back 100 years ago, they said 435 is going to be the number, so the ridings will get a lot bigger, the redistricting will happen. But is there a policy debate, Premier? Maybe, let's just say, do you need, in this province, again, until we're a couple of million people, do you need more than 61 MLAs?
No, I think 61 is a pretty good number. That's why, again, we tried to find that balance. If you have, the province has grown, and not just in the cities. You'll know that rural areas of the province, towns and villages are growing as well. And I think it's fair that they would expect sort of a representative form of government as well, the appropriate amount of representation. We didn't want to go up to some high numbers that some were suggesting that the legislature has been in the past, and so we struck this balance. But I completely understand those who are concerned and would just like to keep every single part of government as small as possible. Even within our own austerity plans for government, even with our plans to reduce the overall size of government, some parts are growing. We've added child care workers, for example, because that's a priority. And so I think a voice for Saskatchewan people should also be a priority, especially if we can achieve it at a cost-neutral basis.
Premier Brad Wall. Hey, daylight saving time happens this weekend.
We were also, when I was going up and down the line at the job fair, I wanted to talk to the people there and find out about their story, but I was actually looking for a talk show host to recruit who didn't want to talk about daylight savings time. But
you can find Irish ones. Gormleys are a dime a dozen in Dublin, as you know.
They're like Walls in Swift-Current area.
Yeah. Walls to the Mennonites, Gormleys to the Irish. Okay. Well, thank you. I'm glad you met lots of Gormleys, and hopefully you got some talk show hosts. The competition's a good thing. But, you and I sense a few years ago you were much warmer to the idea of, for example, a plebiscite, an opinion taking. What are you doing on this? You're not going to move, are you?
No, we're not. We did talk about a province-wide referendum to see what people wanted on the issue. And then poll after poll would come out publicly, and the government did its own survey. And John, overwhelmingly, this province is not interested in change. And like we've talked about in the past, there are parts of the province that do want to change, and then the debate becomes to which time zone. Because a lot of people in the Southwest, for example, would say, we don't want to change, but if you do change, we'd rather be with Montana and Alberta. That's where we do our business and our commerce. And people on the east side, quite rightly, are saying, well, that wouldn't be daylight savings at all, and they're closer to... I think that's the challenge, and maybe the wisdom of this province not changing and moving away from sort of being split down the middle as we were historically. But there's just no... I don't see the demand for it, and those who feel strongly about it, present company included, will continue to talk about it, and I understand that completely, but I wouldn't hold your breath.
Thank you, Premier Brad Wall. Okay, lines are lighting up. This is Ask the Premier. 1-877-332-8255. There is a budget coming in less than 2 weeks. The Legislative Assembly's in now, so you hear lots of talk. Some interesting debate on the whole Dalton McGuinty issue, where you heard the Premier say that his Ontario counterpart was not being helpful on this petrodollar. And apparently a Saskatchewan NDP MLA, did you hear about this? Supporting Dalton McGuinty. Which is, I don't get it, but heck, she's from Saskatoon-Nutana. They'll elect anybody as long as they're running for the NDP in that riding. So we're going to have to talk about that too. But anything on your mind today, Premier Brad Wall takes your calls now, only on News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. This is Ask the Premier, 1-877-332-8255. Premier Brad Wall with us on the phone. Okay, Premier, we have calls coming up. In fact, a good call coming up on CFL and Stadium. So speaking of this, you did weigh in the last week or two and asked on a possible NHL discussion about acquiring some existing NHL team, moving it to Saskatoon. A, what do you know about that? And B, where do you sit?
Well, certainly there's a group that's been working on this, and we're aware of it. It's early on, obviously, and so it's the subject of rumor. But I think it's if Mackenzie's the one that leaked it on TSN, it's probably a good bet that it came from the league, and maybe the league is checking to see what the response is here in the province. And I've been asked a direct question: what about the rink, and what would the province do? Well, when we are presented with an opportunity to invest in that kind of infrastructure, whether it's in Moose Jaw where the Warriors play, or even improvements here in Swift Current where the Broncos played, or in Saskatoon where there was some more seats needed and some improvements to that facility needed to host the very successful World Juniors, we did that when presented with those proposals. And I think that people are watching what the reaction is to the province. Obviously, it's very early on in the process, but if the league is watching, I wonder what they're going to see in all of this. And obviously, a group's pursuing it. I understand Don Cherry's going to go on it again on Coach's Corner this weekend, so be waiting to see that.
Premier Brad Wall, let's go now to the calls. Jack, thank you for hanging on. You have a question, speaking of sports.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. I'd like to ask the Premier for his thoughts on the potential new stadium for Saskatchewan in Regina. The Premier's been saying for almost 5 years that the status quo is not an option, and 5 years later, it's still nothing. I have to say that I'm very disappointed on how the government has distanced themselves from the whole process since they abandoned their idea last year, while provincial governments in Quebec, Manitoba, BC, and Ontario have all had the courage to step up to the plate and get their stadium deals done. With the current facility, it's just I'm embarrassed with it. I had some relatives visit Regina recently, and the first thing they wanted to see was the home of the Riders, and I think we all know what their reaction was when they saw the place.
Jack, good question.
Yeah, I don't think it's I appreciate the question. I don't think it's the government's job. I don't think it's the government's job to drive this process, John. I think it's the government's job to respond to proposals. And there was certainly more government direction early on, but as that project evolved and the costs were clear, and the debate happened about what kind of stadium we might want for the province, I think it's an important step for the team and the city to be working certainly with the province, but for there to be an actual proposal. And I think that's coming soon. But we wouldn't be at that point yet.
Premier Brad Wall is here. This is called Ask the Premier, 1-877-332-8255. Cynthia in Saskatoon, you're on with Premier Wall.
Good morning, Premier Wall. I have some questions for you about the Health Information Privacy Act. Are you familiar with that act?
I am. I'm also familiar with some of the debate and talk that's happened on this show.
Okay, I'm that mom.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I recognized your voice. Okay, so now I know there's a lot of detail here that isn't relevant to the actual debate. But Cynthia, your point was you tried to get simply the admission and the discharge date of your daughter, just to say what dates did she go in. She's 16, therefore she's under 18. So both the Health Information Protection Act, the Mental Health Services Act, and the Health Region Policy says if she's under 18, it's up to the information provider to decide how much or whether you know. Is that your understanding?
Correct.
And can I just before we get into the issue in specific, I understand that have you had a chance to talk to the quality care coordinator yet in your region?
Yes, I did.
And
she spoke with the Privacy Commission, and they stood by the health region.
You know, it's hard not to look at this issue as just as a parent, as a dad, instead of the other job. And so this is something we've sort of just returned and became aware of, but I just want to make some inquiries for my own satisfaction to find out some of the rationale here, because on the face of it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the case of obviously parents who are earnestly trying to look after the well-being of their kids, and I want to look into it, and maybe we can have an update on a later show, but I sure appreciate what you're going through and that you'd call in today, Cynthia.
Cynthia, thank you. Let's make sure, Scott, we'll just grab Cynthia's number. Scott, we'll just grab Cynthia's number off the air. I think we might have it. She called a couple of weeks ago and started what was a pretty good debate around here. Let's get back to your calls. Coming up bottom of the hour, we have one full half hour where we'll try to get as many calls on the radio as we can fit with Premier Brad Wall. Marius in Saskatoon, you're on with the Premier.
Yes, Premier. Thanks for returning my call. I'm kind of nervous here, so be patient.
Don't be nervous. You bet. We'll be.
Okay, for one thing, they're talking about the federal government to raise to 67 years old age pension.
Yeah.
Now, have you ever checked that out just kind of see how much it's going to cost us? Like, one example is welfare, eh? Once you turn 65, they cut some of your benefits because you go get the old age pension. Another one is workman compensation. I believe once you turn 65, they cut some of your benefits. And another one is, I saw in the paper on the Star Phoenix and the Sun, I don't quite understand. You say each penny it goes up, it costs the provincial government $20 to $25 million more.
For what, the dollar?
The price of the dollar?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. Those are two different questions, right, Marius, but I think the first question is great. What are the provincial implications should the Harper government raise OAS from 65 to 67?
Sure, I think our finance ministry is looking at that, and obviously any adjustments that are made in current programs at age 65 because OAS kicks in are going to have to be reviewed if that age changes. We want to be very clear here. That would be a federal government decision, but we'd have to respond in a common sense approach, because 65 is the age right now for a reason for some of the adjustments that the callers referenced in those programs that Marius has mentioned. And so if that changes, then it makes sense that we're going to have to look at that age piece.
Okay.
On the dollar,
actually, Premier, let's hang on that. We're just going to head to the bottom, because I've got a bunch of questions on oil I want to put to you. So I think that dollar issue dovetails in well. Premier Brad Wall is with us. When we get back, Saskatchewan, the oil economy, and the Premier's recent comments about Dalton McGuinty on the petrodollar. I'm Gormley, only on News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. Premier Brad Wall is with us. This is our monthly session of Ask the Premier. So the legislature began its spring session this week. There is a budget in less than 2 weeks. And the Premier just back from a trip that took him to the UK, meeting with a number of business and mining companies, then Ireland for a job fair, and then meeting with the Prime Minister on different national issues, and then returning home to Saskatchewan just a couple of nights ago. Premier is here until the top of the hour. Ask the Premier means your calls on anything you want to put to the Premier. Premier, just heading into the break, Marius had asked about the issue of every time the Canadian dollar rises by a cent, Saskatchewan ends up effectively losing some money from oil revenues and oil royalties. What does that mean?
Well, we sell all of our resources and the products in this, not all of them certainly, but those resources are sold in U.S. dollars, are valued in U.S. dollars, and so when the Canadian dollar advances, there's a real impact on our budget. That's why, all across the country, premiers watch very carefully the exchange rate, so do the federal government, to see what impact there will be on revenues. What Premier McGuinty said, though, the other day was, a bit concerning. By the way, he's since apologized. It was strange that the NDP yesterday in the legislature would be basically taking his side in all of this, because he's sort of backed off. But what he was referring to, and I think I'm going to paraphrase him a bit, but not much, he said basically, if given a choice between a low Canadian dollar and a strong oil and gas industry in the West, he'd pick a low Canadian dollar. First of all, that's a pretty concerning remark right there, fairly divisive, and it's it's not an either-or proposition, of course. The reason for the low Canadian or the higher Canadian dollar is not simply the oil and gas sector. It's the collapse of the U.S. economy, or the near collapse. The trouble they're going through certainly has an impact. Potash is a major export of Canada. So are the other resources we have in the province. And so there's a bit of an attack then on Western economies that I don't think are very good, very helpful in terms of Canadian unity. One final point, John, is this, an important one. If we are confusing a low dollar for productivity in this country, for being able to compete around the world, but we got big problems. Because, of course, we know the dollar is going to go up and down. I remember former Premier Lougheed being worried that this country was thinking it was very competitive when actually we had such a low dollar, and it was a bit of a sort of a false source of comfort there. And I'd say that is true for our entire manufacturing sector right across the country, and it's principally located in central Canada, that there's other things we can do to become productive in a world where our dollar is worth more. But, I thought the remarks were divisive, and it was unfortunate that seemingly, anyway, the NDP took the side of Ontario, even though the Premier of Ontario has backed off his own remarks.
Yes, so now what happened here? This was a Saskatoon newly elected NDP MLA, Cathy Spruill. So now, she made some point that you calling this divisive was actually driving a wedge into the debate, because she said that, historically oil and gas have been underpriced and they've driven the dollar up. And so was she supporting McGuinty or simply understanding him, or what was her take?
It sure seemed that way to me. In fact, I think she meant overpriced, because there was a lot of her speech that was, even though they supported our motion to basically support the energy sector in the West yesterday in the legislature, her speech, and there just seemed to be a lot of discomfort with the sector. We in this country and in this province need to be proud of the fact that we're an emerging energy power, especially considering that in this country we spend probably more per capita to reduce the environmental impacts of energy development and export, and because of the kind of country we are in terms of our competitors in the energy sector, a country where we respect human rights, a country where there's a rule of law, and of course a strong and stable democracy. But it seems that some are still embarrassed of the industry, and that's the sense we got yesterday. And she basically, her inference, I think, yesterday was that it was Saskatchewan, my comments, that were divisive on the issue. And I'm not sure anybody in the country was agreeing, including the Premier of Ontario, who a couple days later backtracked from the remark. There's certain things in the legislature we ought to be able to agree on. Some things we won't, but I thought this was one of them, and apparently not. 1-877-332-8255. Any questions to the Premier? Now, some of your questions have specific concerns to you in your business, your sector, or your town. Mark, you're on with Premier Brad Wall.
Yeah, good morning, Premier. Nice to see you back.
Good to be back.
SaskTel recently made the decision not to support desktop publishing when you send an email. All they will now support is something called webmail, which does not support any business application. I think that's a very regressive move, and it isn't going in the same direction as the province. Now, they will tell you that you can pay a monthly fee and get that kind of support, but I'm already paying $60-some a month living out in the country, so if they would allow us to pay on a one-time basis when we need it, I guess I could live with it. But I think this is a very regressive move.
I appreciate the question. I confess to you that I don't know the details of this. As you know, we have provided dollars from general revenue to SaskTel, and SaskTel themselves have used some of their own earnings to really step up and increase investment, even more recently in terms of dealing with the drop call issue, but building out the rural infrastructure and partnering with other partners to do that, and partnering with other providers to do that. But I'm not sure of this issue, and I'll find out a little bit more about it and report back.
Okay, let's take that. So let's get.
By the way, we did have a question last time out on a bridge. By the way, John, if at any point we can report on that one.
Let's do that now, because usually I ask you at the top what you have for follow up. So this was now. I'm trying to remember what the question was.
I think there was a request for another crossing. Basically, the caller said to cross the river south of Saskatoon, the closest place to do so was at Outlook.
Oh, yes.
And we're reconsidering another crossing point, a bridge or a ferry. The honest and short answer is no, we're not right now. We have a lot of priorities in terms of transportation infrastructure. Obviously, we also have the discussion of bridges in Saskatoon and Prince Albert, and in the short answer is no, this is not being looked at as a priority at this time.
Premier Brad Wall, let's go to Saskatoon caller Ryan. Ryan, you're on with the Premier. You have a question on automobile law in the province.
I do, yeah, and I've lived in other provinces across Canada, and I kind of understand the reason why we can't tint the front windows, but I was curious. I know you got a pile of things on the plate, and you're a very busy man, but has there been any talk, and how difficult would it be to change the law so that we could put tint on the front windows of our vehicles?
I don't think we would. It just intuitively, I can understand the reason why we wouldn't want to do that from an enforcement standpoint, and I just don't. I'm pretty sure it's not being considered. I'll double check, and if it is, I'll report back. But if not, I'll probably leave it at that, John, and say that it's not a change we're likely to look at.
Yeah. No, I think the debate here is you've got some hot states. You know, you got a lot of sun like Arizona, California, where people may tint. The big issue is, of course, the police can't see you, and that's been the concern, a public safety concern.
On the sun piece, may I suggest a giant rider visor? That might work well. Just one of those big cardboard things. The riders probably have them in 8 different shapes and sizes at their store.
For sale.
For sale.
Darren in Saskatoon, you're on with Premier Brad Wall.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
All right. My question is, you know how we don't like to mix church and state, and I think everyone tries to avoid that, but why are we mixing the SLGA and social ethics? You know, it's...
What do you mean by social ethics, Darren?
So, well, like the Lingerie Football League. If there's some bit of nudity, you know, for instance, the SLG will prohibit alcohol. That's what I mean. Who are they to judge what is good and what is right in a social standing?
You know, I think that's been a response by previous administrations as well to the public in terms of the kinds of things they want to have licensed and not licensed. And I haven't heard. I hear concerns from time to time. To be fair to Darren on this, you know, there's others, but not in a number that would have I don't think that would demand a revisiting of the policy. I mean, I could be wrong on that, but that's certainly my sense intuitively. That there's no real demand for change in this regard.
Okay, so on the whole strip clubs issue, is that something that you get pushed on? Other provinces have strip clubs, Saskatchewan doesn't. Well, Saskatchewan have them, but they can't serve alcohol.
Maybe once every 2 years, and it's a couple. Honestly, not at all. Or I should say, not very many at all.
Premier Brad Wallace here. Your questions to the Premier at 1-877-332-8255. Boy, we have an array of questions today. The whole issue on chiropractic care, another question coming up on that. One of our callers was challenging the Premier. She says we don't need more MLAs and state of the highways, among others. Stand by. I'm John Gormley. This is Ask the Premier, only on News Talk Radio. I'm John Gormley. Premier Brad Wallace here. About every month, in fact, almost a month on clockwork, the Premier joins us. It's called Ask the Premier. You and Premier Brad Wall, you fire your questions, the Premier gives you an answer. Sometimes he will take one away, do a little research, and then the next month he gets back to us. Let's go to Richard in Regina. Richard, question to the Premier on highways.
Yes, John, you had a call from a trucker about 2 weeks ago complaining about the number 1 highway east. Was that, did you remember that?
I did. This was a trucker who he said the state of the highways generally not good. Is that your concern, Richard?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah,
okay.
That's East Regina number 1 highway near the Manitoba border, Premier.
Okay. Well, thank you, Richard. I mean, as you might know, Richard, we have spent record amounts on highways construction and repair. Last year we had to add quite a bit to that record amount just to deal with some of the flooding issues. But let me just say, we readily and freely admit there is more work needed. There is, in our view, been a long-term neglect of the highways infrastructure reflected in budgets of the past. I think when we were first elected 4 years ago or so, the CAA said the infrastructure deficit in highways was $1 billion, never mind what would be needed on an ongoing basis. And so we've been investing year after year record amounts in highways, and again a little bit more last year because of the flooding, or perhaps you could say a lot more. We recognize there's more needed, and so even as we look for austerity opportunities in this next budget coming up in just a few weeks, we do want to continue to invest that amount in highways. We know there's lots more to be done, lots of catch-up still, but we're determined to get that job done.
Premier Brad Wall, okay, this was a question on my list I didn't get to. You just used the word austerity. Yep. I point out in my column today that it's a bit of an either-or. You know, you're either prosperous or you're in a time of austerity. My argument is, you can be prosperous and cut back government. But what's the message you send, though, in advance of the budget when you talk about cutting back? Does that send a message to people that the services delivered by government are going to diminish?
I hope not. I hope people in this province, and I think they understand this, I think people right across the spectrum understand that at the very foundation of a prosperous, successful Saskatchewan is fiscal responsibility, is fiscal discipline. I think people who've been involved in business, or even people who are just worried about their family budget, know that austerity, being responsible with dollars, is going to lead to long-term prosperity, long-term financial strength. And I think that's what the election was about, actually, John. There were two clear choices this last fall. One was a massive spend from our opponents, and ours was pretty small in terms of the promises, the amount of money that was committed by our platform. And people, I think, understand that these two things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, one is linked to the other. Austerity, fiscal responsibility, actually improves our chances to keep this province moving forward, to keep things sustainable. And that's where we're going to come down on this budget. We have to make sure we avoid in Saskatchewan what we've seen in some other places here in the country and around the world. We're determined to do that, even though there's tough decisions to be made.
Premier Brad Wall, let's go to Brian. Brian, a question on chiropractic care.
Yes, thank you for taking my call, John. Thank you, Mr. Premier. I've been in support all the way through. I think you guys are doing a wonderful job, and it's tough being fiscal. One question I do have is, through a farm accident many years ago, chiropractic care is something that will be with me for the rest of my life, and the decision made to reduce or to get rid of the subsidy, I'm just wondering where that came from, and if that's something that would someday come back, or the reason why it was taken away. If you could just explain more, I'd appreciate it.
Well, it's what the change that we've made is consistent with what other provinces have done, where there is coverage for chiropractic services, but limited to people with lower incomes. We also, or people who are availing themselves of the seniors income plan, and those recipients receive each a maximum of 12 treatments. There was a change in terms of the amount of help offered, as you know, and to be honest, I don't see us going back to that. I know that for some this is a bit of a challenge, but again, on this particular program and other programs we have that we wanted to have available for those who most need it, from an income standpoint, we need to make sure they're available in the long term and sustainable. These are those programs that are well received, but I think from time to time we need to take a look at them and make sure we are managing them properly for their long-term sustainability. And to be honest, I appreciate the call. I don't think we'll be making a change back to the way it was on the chiropractic services.
Premier Brad Wall, time for one call quickly. Brenda, you're on with the Premier.
Yes, I was very upset when I heard, as John was, about needing 3 more LMAs. I've got a school in my area that just got closed down. We need a solution to our health care. I want to keep more of my paycheck. There needs to be responsibility to the old people that they've got to work longer at 67. Do we really need to have 3 more politicians that really aren't going to give a darn about us?
Well, I don't agree with the last part. I think they will. First of all, that's my experience with MLAs in the legislature, regardless of what party they're with, is that they work hard on behalf of constituents. And again, we wanted to strike the right balance here. We have a province that's grown to a record level. We're certainly not going to go as high as the record amount of MLAs we once had in the legislature a couple of decades ago at 66. We think we struck the balance. But let me make this commitment to you, Brenda. There's not going to be an additional budget requirement, new dollars for this. We can accommodate the $700,000 for 3 MLAs within the Legislative Assembly budget. We'll work on our side through something that's called the Board of Internal Economy to get that done after the next election. I think we can achieve this balance without having to move out resources away from the priorities that Brenda mentioned, because those are our priorities. That's why we've made investments in education and health care, and we've lowered every taxes to the point where a family of 4 earns more here before they pay any taxes at all than anywhere else in the country. And we want to, it's part of the Saskatchewan advantage, and we absolutely want to keep that moving forward.
Mr. Premier, always good having you by on the monthly session. I guess we'll see you at the budget March 21st and talk again soon.
See you there, John. Thanks for the time.
Premier Brad Wall, spending, as he does regularly, 1 hour with us on your calls. And I apologize, we didn't get every call on, but boy, we had a great cross-section today.